My most challenging interview and why. I said Adrian Bronner last time.
Fuck you and fuck boxing, brother.
And I explained why that is. Ricardo Mayorga. This is a guy who's smoking cigarettes and like slapping people on the butt. And
who have you found to be probably the most intimidating to speak to?
Mike Tyson.
Yeah.
Obviously, to this day, I have no problem talking to imposing figures or people who are even aggressive. At any moment, that like sweet, endearing person can turn into a fucking monster.
Mine, when I first started out in boxing, was Andre Ward. And I think it was because he is one of those guys you got to come correct with. But initially, that was probably the person that intimidated me the most.
Yeah, that's a good one. You got to be on your P's and Q's with Andre Ward. Many people remember my interview with Virgil Hunter.
It's your personal opinion because
my personal opinion. This is like we said, it's perception.
I won't tell you anything more about it.
Go Google that shit.
It's the 17-minute one. Believe me, it's worth all 17 minutes. Radio Rahim Michelle Joy Phelps, stuck with you, stuck with each other, stuck still with no boxing, and I must say this has been a tough pull for me today. I'm getting into my depressed, no boxing, no conversation like of substance about boxing kind of mode. So over the past couple weeks, Michelle, it's been a lot of conversation, not very much about boxing itself, but the fans, I think, are getting a little anxiety like we are just chatting shit about anything. So I decided, let's harken back to the good old days. Let's go back to when things were lovely and we were able to cover the sport and the conversation was about fights and fighters and things that actually mattered. And I thought, the first time I covered boxing in the UK was like a special thing. I didn't realize how special it was at the time or what the future would hold for me on that side of the pond. But I think both of us have had like unique and interesting experiences there. And I remember my first fight being WHYTE Joshua. And I didn't know what fight was it that you covered first. It's not like we were over there at the same time necessarily, but we both made our way individually. What was your first fight there?
It was FROCH GROVES too.
Yeah, both of our fights had a long history of rivalry there. Both of these guys, it was a bit of a grudge match. I don't know. Tell me about your experience with FROCH GROVES too. A fight I didn't cover, in fact.
I felt very intimidated because I didn't know anyone aside from Eddie Hearn via Twitter.
Hey, fight fans.
And Coogan.
Hi, fight fans.
Whom I met in Atlantic City. I think a year prior to that. It's like being the new kid in school where you don't really know anyone. You don't really know how to go about it. So I just sort of winged it, introduced myself to everybody. I found that everyone was very welcoming. And to my surprise, some people were familiar. They were like, oh yeah, I've seen your stuff in the US. And I'm like, oh, okay. So it wasn't too terrible. I'm pretty sure I could have had some terrible stories to tell, but I'm very fortunate I didn't. And everyone was extremely helpful. Anthony Lever really went out of his way to make sure that we got the interviews. Everyone was saying, it's funny because Carl never knew about this, but everyone would say, Carl is a bit of a jerk and he's probably not going to be the nicest person to interview. And so I went into it with that feeling, with that thought that, oh my God, is he going to be a jerk to me? So I was really surprised that he was really nice. He was nowhere near a jerk. And it was just a good laugh because looking back on it, I was intimidated. I didn't know what to expect.
I had a different experience in that I didn't know anyone either that was involved in my fight. including Eddie Hearn. Like, I'm not big on Twitter. I certainly wasn't then. I don't think I was on Twitter at all. I kind of came over a little blind. I had been to the UK before. I had covered a boxing event before. I mean, I had my footing there. I really enjoyed it, which is why I made it an effort to come back and like really get my feet wet. But I got my feet wet in a heavyweight grudge match with the most popular heavyweight boxer in England at the time, and a guy who really believed in his heart and soul that he was going to be able to beat that guy. And this was his opportunity to show England that he's really the man and not like the pedigree polished guy that Joshua is. And so the first introduction I had to both of those guys was like their view of each other.
You're fraud.
Okay, it's your opinion.
You're going like you're this nice guy and you're a scum.
Right? And there was such a stark contrast, especially then and even now, in just their attitudes, the way they approach the media, the sport, the way that people look at them, their backstory, and all of that. I didn't realize was such a big. I don't know if it was a controversy, but it was the beginnings of a controversy in that Dylan thought of himself kind of like as the everyman's guy, like the street guy that was coming authentic, that was real, and he was about to bring that to the fight and knock this kind of polished kid off his pedestal. And he felt like Joshua was a fake and he was not the choir boy, poster boy image that people were portraying, and he wanted to expose that. And Joshua was a little condescending to Dylan White, like, come on, man, like, you're being childish, this is ridiculous the way you're trying to paint me, grow up kind of thing. And there's something to be said for both camps in that way. But I didn't know Coogan. I didn't know Eddie Hearn. I didn't know even Anthony Lever. I just came in to do my thing. And there was definitely some adjustments made. I think the first moment that the world was introduced to Coogan and I as a rivalry, something of ours on our own, was in my Anthony Joshua interview, the first one I did on that fight week with him. There was a hilarious thing that went on that I had no idea was happening at the time. But it started this like Coogan verse radio thing, which never was like a real thing, at least not from my perspective. And like I even said on the broadcast we did with him, before I got there, just, to get familiarized with undercard fighters and whatnot, I watched some of his work. So I had nothing against the guy. And so there was a moment there that went a bit viral in my first Anthony Joshua interview.
I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, well, you talk about interviewing FROCH for the first time. He wasn't like a dick, like people were saying that he was gonna be. What was the interview actually like?
It was funny because apparently he wasn't going to do any more interviews, and Eddie and Anthony Lever had pulled him to the side and go, we have this girl who flew all the way from America. We just give her a few minutes of your time. So they told me he's in the next room. So literally Anthony went from running me over to go get George Groves done to literally running me all the way back to the other side to go chase FROCH out the door, basically. And I did that, and I was like, hi. And then he was just like, hi, it's nice to meet you. Like, it was very friendly. It wasn't anything like I thought. I mean, I like to think of myself as a relatively like nice individual. I don't think I'm too hard on anyone. Like, I'm just very like, go in. I like to do fun, happy interviews and leave. But he didn't really know me, so I didn't know what to expect. He didn't know me at all. So I didn't know what to expect, but the interview went well, and he was actually very complimentary in my interview, and he said some stuff in there that everyone's like, oh, his missus isn't going to be happy about that.
How are we feeling?
I'm feeling a lot better now.
And I was like, oh, damn, I'm not trying to I don't want to upset anybody. I mean, he was just being nice, but you know how fans are. They like to say, oh, that person's flirting or that person's flirting. But I just think that he was just being nice. I was just a girl coming from America who needed to ask him a few questions. And that was it. But I was very intimidated. I was scared because whether or not I showed it, I was really scared because I didn't know, if he was going to blow me off and be like, no, I don't got time for it. I don't know who she is. Do you know how it goes? We've been in that position before where...
Well, not me so much. I don't think anyone's ever thought I was flirting with a guy or anybody was particularly describing my interviews as happy and fun, which is, why they like to talk to you. And it didn't take long for me to unearth my first bit of controversy, which is, I think, what I'm more known for, certainly, than the pleasant, fun interviews. And that came by way of Dylan White. So when he came for Joshua, in my interview with him, Dylan White, I mean, I was a bit taken aback. I didn't expect him to really go there. He had mentioned some things on the podium because it was a press conference day, and like he threw shots fired. So between the Coogan thing happening right out the gate, and then Dylan like taking serious shots at Joshua, I was like, okay, well, this British boxing shit is my kind of thing. Like they're taking it seriously, and everybody's in their feelings, and the daggers are out.
The tension between Carl Froch and George Groves, like, mind you, I didn't know either one of them at this point, but it was very intense.
Was there like any particular interview that you remember that like sparked that, I mean, I know you go for the fun stuff and you're not looking for controversy, but was there any like interview that stood out for you during fight week or post?
I remember it was the gloves are off. The gloves are off are always a good one to reference to. There was, at this point, Carl felt the desire to silence George because a lot of people felt that they shouldn't have stopped the fight. And so he was sort of going into this of like, I'm only doing this to basically quiet everybody down, but I know I'm going to beat him again. Looking back on it, I just remember it being a fun media week. I remember it kind of standing out to me as not only were the crowds absolutely large, like you go to a media workout and there was like 1,000+ people there. I wasn't used to that. As you know, in the States, it's a little bit different than that. You might get a few hundred max unless you're Floyd Mayweather or Manny Pacquiao. But at the time, I had not been around a fight of that magnitude before. So to think back on it, like, and looking at it, it was pretty surreal. And I remember it was fight night when I remember thinking, holy crap, I've never seen anything like this. I've never seen 80,000 people in attendance ever. And as you know, that's the one reference point to Carl. He's always talking about that, the 80,000 people. He was able to pull out the 80,000 people. And at that point, to my understanding, it's not been done before. So it was really cool to kind of not only have my first UK show, or be at my first UK show, but be at one that made history.
Yeah, I have to say, and this is true for pretty much every fight in the UK, big, medium, and small, the fan energy is electric. Like, they don't miss a beat. They show up for the or the fight week events, the workouts, everything. They're gung-ho. And on the night, it's just... Yeah,
they're dancing. They're doing the whole thing. You even before as you see everybody walking into the arena, everyone's already wasted.
I think the energy that the fans offer the fight before fight night, during events, press events, and then on the night feed into the broadcasters and journalists as well. I mean, I fed off of it. It kept me pumped. It kept me engaged. It made me excited maybe during lulls. And it was my first time also talking to some of the UK broadcasters, Sky Sports guys, people who regularly cover boxing on that side of the pond. And I got a lot of enthusiasm in that regard too. It was fun to talk to them, hear their accents, different, terms they use from the ones we use in America and ways they break down the fight. So I had fun kind of learning their style of broadcasting. And the way that their enthusiasm, I think, bleeds into the event as well. I think our broadcasters generally, nothing is, absolute, but generally take a different tone, a different tact. It's definitely a little bit of a different style on how boxing is covered. And the enthusiasm of the broadcasters and willingness to like participate with other media and just keep talking the fight and give their perspective and actually like give definitive predictions and feel like everybody's kind of a part of the same moment, I thought was infectious. And I definitely took inspiration from that.
Yeah.
Both of our fights, I thought, ended satisfying, had satisfying ends. Mine, because Dylan White, although losing by knockout, was the first to have buckled Joshua. right? And because nobody had really shown any chinks in his armor or certainly not gotten him down, but apparently hadn't even really put him in trouble before, that was such a big deal. It reminded me of when Shane Mosley buckled Mayweather. And even though he went on to lose every round after that, Mosley I'm talking about, it's still like his crowning achievement in the Mayweather fight that people always reference and harken back to. And until I think Joshua Klitschko, the Dylan White buckling was like a big deal. And people would reference that in every Joshua fight, and that's was making them call for the rematch. Like that one particular moment was shocking enough to show that Joshua was vulnerable somehow, and that maybe on a different night, Dylan White would have been able to pull it out. So having had that moment made really good post-fight interviews. Yeah. And the atmosphere was still contentious. Joshua clearly won. There was no arguing that, but it made it like, maybe we want to see this again. And I think to this day, people still want to see that again. Not only because both fighters have grown, but because there was that one moment of doubt that people wonder if Dylan White can recreate.
Yeah. I remember being really jealous that you were at that fight. At the time, I could not afford to go. So, back in the day when you're just trying to make ends meet, I was like, can't afford to fly myself to England for this fight, so I had to sit it out. But I was definitely jealous because every time people talk about that fight, it's like I knew I wasn't there. I knew I wasn't able to sort of reference back to what that energy was like in the arena. But I would love to see a rematch, and I think the stars will align for them at some point in the future. I really do, especially because the heavyweight division, I still feel is relatively small. Like in terms of like the top 10, it's like I still see the potential of having that rematch.
It's because the heavyweight division, I think we have enough names to bandy about, but when you get stopped as a heavyweight, when you get knocked out as a heavyweight, it just seems so much more definitive that you start scratching guys off the list. Like it seems like the pool continues to get smaller, but they can still fight. Like there's still a lot of great matchups to be made, even outside the championship title fights.
So it's like where you see one guy beat another guy you never thought beat that guy, and then it just becomes like this thing of like, well, if he could beat him, then surely he could beat him. Or if they fought in a rematch, he would for sure win this time. So it's always fun with the heavyweights, isn't it? But we are much more critical and hard on the heavyweights than I would imagine any other weight class, because you're right. It's like you get knocked out, you're done. That's it. Just retire. There's no coming back. You're finished. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but at the same time, we all know that it's such a one-punch division. More so, I would say, than the other ones, just by definition, because of the weight and the power of these guys. A dark horse can have a great night and upset the whole apple cart, and a guy who's thought of as, a good contender but probably not good enough can put one combination together and change the whole course of history. So you have to give even the lesser talented, or those who are thought to be lesser talented, a shot at beating the big boys and the world title holders. You never really know what's going to happen in a heavyweight division, and you never really know what's going to happen in a boxing match. But I would say that's most true in the heavyweight division, because more so than any other division, one punch really can change the fight.
I might cringe when I have to look back on those interviews. I'm just saying.
You're
just
cringe?
Yeah, well, meaning like, when you've been doing this as long as you have, you look back on the newer interviews and you're like, ooh. That's phone in that area.
What are we talking about? Like appearance?
No, I'm talking about like, when you first, at the time you weren't new to the game. I was. So it was like just kind of looking back on my early interviews. I hate looking at them because I'm like, oh God, you could have been so much better. But you learn. That's how you learn. You put yourself out there and you do it again and again and again until you sort of find what works for you. So that's what I mean by cringe. Like, I might be like, oh, like watching back my early interviews is never fun.
Yeah, I think an important aspect of anybody that's trying to pursue a profession is that you recognize that you always have to be trying to get better. I'm going to look back on this episode and cringe. I'll look back on the most recent interview I did and cringe. It's never good enough, and there's always improvements to be made. I am always thinking about, like, oh, I could have done that better. I could have done that. I've got to get better. That's our job. Like, that's our individual responsibilities, to continue to get better, to continue to strive to deliver more concise content, continue to put the fighters and the promoters and the trainers through their paces, ask the important questions, touch on the subject matters that may not be politic to talk about, and to be at the top of your game and to bring your A game to every interview. And I'm never satisfied with the job I've done. I'm always critiquing and thinking about what I could have done better. And you're right, looking back at something like that, I only wish I knew then what I know now. You know how the fight turns out once you watch your, like, fight week interviews. You're like, oh, I should have asked this. I should have went with that.
That was the week that Hey Fight Fans was sort of like born, because when I look back at my early stuff, I realized how fast I spoke. And the reason why I did that was because when you're new to the game, you're lucky if you get 1 minute, because they're not giving you 10 minutes. They don't know you. They don't care. So they're like, all right, hurry up and ask a question. So I learned to talk fast to hurry up and get my point across. So if I had 2 minutes, I'm like, okay, da-da-da, da-da-da, da-da-da. So Coogan used to say,
Hi, Fight fans!
but he said it so fast. And I never understood until looking back, where I was like, oh my God, I used to say, hey, Fight fans, like really fast, and like just, and it was because I was sort of trained that way, because it was, when you have such limited time with someone, I just learned to talk fast.
All right, well, now I definitely got to go revisit this. I didn't even know that was born that week. That's awesome.
You know what? Looking back, reflecting just a little bit on even just my own journey, I'm glad I didn't give up. I'm glad that I kept going and forging these relationships, because the people back then, mind you, the first time I interviewed AJ was on the FROCH GROVES 2 card. So I think he was like 2-0 at the time. And he was just this prospect that everyone talked about from the Olympics. And who would have known? You know what I mean? Like, you develop these relationships over the years with people you start interviewing as their prospects. And same with Errol Spence Jr. I remember the same thing, like kind of interviewing him when he was just a prospect, and he is who he is today. So, and you know that they grow that sort of bond with you as well, because you've been along the journey with them. So it does help in the long run. But that's why I always find it to be so important to interview the prospects, because they are tomorrow's champions. So to have this idea of, oh, I don't want to interview the smaller guys, it's like, I have heard people make comments like that, and I'm like, not the way to go, because they are the champions tomorrow. So, but anyways, it's been fun. It's been fun looking back, and it's been fun kind of, like I said, I'm going to cringe when I look back at my old interviews. But
yeah, you know, I've been doing this long enough to have seen the debut of world champions, the prime of their career, the decline, the retirement, and then the moving into other fields, broadcasting, or any number of other things that fighters get into post-career or nothing. I've seen the entire arc from beginning to end with more than a few fighters now. Like, having done this that long really gives you a perspective on what the career arc is for a great fighter. Also, for, you know, the gatekeepers and the journeymen and the guys who never quite become what you thought they might be when they were great prospects, and guys who seem to come out of nowhere, make a lot of noise. But most importantly for me, because I have a far less violent type of profession, so it doesn't require the kind of resilience for me to continue my career as it does for a fighter. So my lifespan as a professional is a lot longer than any professional fighters could ever hope to be. But one thing is true for them and us is that you're constantly looking back and remembering these moments and recognizing that what you did before, what you did yesterday may not be good enough for today. And you got to keep it sharp. And you got to keep looking at how you can improve for tomorrow. And that has been what has constantly driven me. And just like you say, debut fighters, 2-0 fighters, guys straight out of the Olympics that you don't know what their future is going to be, you give them attention. You give, you take that moment in history and be like, talk to them when you have the opportunity.
I know everybody always has a destination in mind, but the journey truly sort of molds you into what you never thought you could be. Like when I first started, some of the stories, I had a hell welcoming. It was never, we're glad you're here. It was actually really bad. And so the resilience shown over the years of staying put, seeing it through, believing in yourself, and being consistent was everything. And so I get it. I appreciate every obstacle I've ever had, because it is where I stand today, and I'm proud of who I am today, and I'm proud of what I've been able to accomplish even when every door was closed on me. So no matter who it is, it's all about resilience and believing in oneself beyond what anyone else has to say about you.
Well, let's hope that we can apply all of these lessons and get back to boxing in the coming weeks, get back to our craft. I can't wait to see people back behind their mics, back in the ring, doing the thing that we do. We get inspiration from each other, inspiration from fighters. I want to be on the cover of one of these one day, like Ali, Ring Magazine. There are a lot of institutions in this sport that are built over many years, many decades, and that's what I look to be myself, and I respect those who climb the ladder and get the job done the way it's supposed to be done. So next week, hopefully we'll be stuck with boxing again finally, and maybe, just maybe, we can get this show back on the road and boxing back in the ring and a smile back on my face. So it's been fun, Michelle.
I know, it's nice talking to you too.
All right, well, you got to give us the signature sign off. I mean, Radio Rahim here.
Bye, fans.